Okay, thank you everyone for joining us for this masterclass with Dean Sorenson entitled Tools for Great Jazz Rehearsals. And we're going to get to meet Dean and go through his presentation. Just a little bit more about Dean. In addition to the books that you're seeing in the he's composed an enormous amount of content for jazz, but it's just not the compositions. He's a Yamaha trombone artist. He's done compositions for big band, concert band, jazz band, and combos, and in particular jazz method books, which is kind of the topic that we'll be dealing with more today. Recently, Dean was commissioned to write a great band piece for the University of Minnesota that celebrated the 125 years of bands at the University of Minnesota. I was at that concert, and it was just a great evening and great music. But not only does he perform and compose, he's a clinician and he's a recording artist. He's got his Dean Sorenson sextet. And before we bring him on, we just have a little bit of housekeeping to let you know who's in the meeting here. My colleague, Dr. Giovanna Cruz, and I will be hosting. And Giovanna, maybe you could tell a little bit about the questions and answers and how they get through that.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Hi, my name is Giovanna Cruz, and I work with Lee here at Make Music as one of the education managers. I am a string player, so jazz is, although I love listening to it, is not my area of expertise. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will be the one taking your questions. So whenever there is a question that pops up in your mind, please go to the chat window and then send that question to me, and I will be collecting those in a document that all three of us, Lee, Dean, and I, can see, and we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we possibly can during the next hour.
Great. So we'll look forward to your questions and your answers. And now to kick us off and take us through this, Dean, welcome to our presentation, and why don't you fill in some gaps that I left about your background, and then take us into your session.
Well, sure. Thanks so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. It's a beautiful day outside here in Minnesota, a little bit hot, but given how much we complain about the cold around here, I suppose I shouldn't complain too much. But appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I want to say thanks right away to Giovanna and Lee for the work that they've done in helping to put this presentation together. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to share some ideas that you're going to find helpful, and things that you can take back and use in your jazz ensemble rehearsals. Like Lee said, I'm a trombone player. I got my Bachelor of Trombone Performance at the University of Minnesota back in the Stone Age. I used to take a wagon train to school. Spent some time freelancing in the Twin Cities, did a couple of years tour with the Glenn Miller Orchestra, got a master's degree at the Eastman School, and started teaching at the University of Minnesota in 1999, and I've been there ever since. And I've had the wonderful privilege of being able to put together quite a few jazz ensemble instructional materials, Standard of Excellence Jazz Ensemble Method, Advanced Jazz Ensemble Method Combo Session, and also Standard of Excellence First Jazz Performance. Many of those I had the privilege of working with Bruce Pearson on. And then a project that is kind of in progress, which is a set of jazz pedagogy textbooks. Two of the volumes are out now, and I'm frantically working on the third. And when we're finished here, you'll have a chance to perhaps get your hands on those. And then also, probably the project that I'm most proud of is what we're going to talk about today. It's a book called First Place for Jazz, and a lot of the concepts and things that we're going to be talking about in here, I put together in First Place for Jazz. I put them together in a book form because it seemed to be the most obvious and easiest way to organize everything. But I think that these are fairly universal concepts also, and they can be applied really across the board. And so just as we get started here, it would be helpful for me to have at least a little bit of an idea of what kinds of levels everyone is teaching out there that's listening. So if you wouldn't mind just shooting a quick note into the chat window and just say, are you middle school, high school, college, all of the above? just so that we can kind of get a sense of what of where you all are at. So the first slide up there is called a balanced rehearsal. And these are some of the concepts that I think about as I'm considering making rehearsal plans and making programming decisions and things of that nature. And balancing these four different elements: long-term goals and short-term goals versus needs of the group and needs of the individual. And the long-term goals I define as something that begins when you sight read and it ends at the concert. In other words, it's something that's accomplished over time. A short-term goal is something that begins at the start of the rehearsal and ends when the rehearsal is over. In other words, it's something that's accomplished within the rehearsal period. And I'm always trying to think about having both of those things on my mind as I'm thinking about what I want to do. My wonderful colleague at the University of Minnesota, Craig Kirchhoff, said to me one time, he said, after a particularly difficult rehearsal, he said, "I wonder what it would be like to drive a bulldozer." And I think because when you drive a bulldozer, you always can look back at the end of the day and see what you've accomplished. And I'm sure that many of us have had rehearsals where we just don't really feel like we've accomplished a whole lot. And that's where I think the short-term goals in particular come in. Have something that you can work on at the beginning of the rehearsal so that when you walk out, at the very least, you'll be able to say that you've accomplished that and you've taken a couple of steps toward the ultimate prize. The other thing that needs to be balanced is the needs of the group versus the needs of the individual. Teaching a music class, a music performance class, whether it's jazz ensemble, concert band, orchestra, choir, doesn't really matter. It's different than teaching English or history. Certainly the English and history students are assessed on what they can do individually. Generally those classes don't have to come together and put together some group project like all of our concerts are. And so we have to have a good product on stage. We have to put together, something that's going to sound well in the collective, but we also have a responsibility to every individual student. And I certainly don't need to tell anyone else out there that, learning styles are different, learning speeds are different, and trying to deal with those discrepancies, I think, is one of the big challenges of teaching just about anything, not just music. So those are some of the things that I think about kind of in general. But as a jazz ensemble instructor, I obviously want to focus on jazz ensemble elements and things that I think are unique to the jazz ensemble. And at the top of that list is the rhythm section. I'm a trombone player by trade, so it took me a while to figure out what to do with the rhythm section. And when you're talking about rhythm section players, we have to deal with individual technique as well as what the rhythm section sounds like as a section. It's the section that makes a jazz band a jazz band. Concert bands and orchestras don't have rhythm sections. And so if we want our jazz ensemble to sound good, we have to have a good handle on the rhythm section. The next bullet point there is full ensemble, and that's my term for the rhythm section plus the brass and the saxes. Phrasing, tuning, articulation, balance, all of those kinds of things. And certainly those are consistent with the kind of work that you do in a concert band, but certainly jazz phrasing, jazz articulation, interpreting jazz articulations, interpreting jazz feel, interpreting swing feel, all those kinds of things kind of fall into this particular category. And then the third thing that I think that really makes jazz ensembles unique is the idea of solos and improvisation. You know, improvisation is the essence of the jazz experience. I think we want to provide as many of our students as possible with the opportunities to do it. It can be a very intimidating activity. It can be intimidating for the students, and it can be intimidating for the teachers as well. And so we're going to talk about some things that you can do both in the large group and also with individuals to help students get to be better soloists and better improvisers. So I like to break things down into what I call the 4 units of preparation. And these 4 percentages refer to the length of time between when you pass a chart out and when it's performed. how are you going to chunk these things out? This is a little kind of long-term thinking right now, but how are we going to break these things up? And what kind of benchmarks do we have in each one of these units so that we have an idea of what it is that we want to accomplish? And I think about them in terms of percentages because the length of actual time, of course, is different for every situation. All of us are going to have different periods of time that we have to prepare a program. In some case, it might be a month, it might be 2 months. In the case of, say, an all-state ensemble or something like that, it might be 2.5 days. And if I'm doing an all-state ensemble, I still follow this particular plan. I think about what I want to get done in that first unit, and the second unit, and the third unit. And so it helps keep me organized, it helps keep me focused, and it helps me plan activities that I think are going to be the most beneficial to the group. So let's go over each one of these in just a little bit of detail in terms of what we're trying to accomplish at each point in the rehearsal process. In the first 25% of the time, obviously you're going to sight read the piece. You want to develop just a basic rhythm section groove. The rhythm section does a lot of things in a jazz ensemble, and we're going to look at some of those. But the most important thing, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? At the bottom of the rhythm section piece of it is groove. The rhythm section has to play with good groove and with good time. And so all the other stuff you can worry about later on, but focus on groove and focus on time. Focus on basic style and phrasing concepts. Now is the time, if it's necessary, to chase notes and fingerings and things like that. Teaching at the university level for as long as I haven't had to do too much of that, except when the saxophones are playing doubles, in which case I'm not a whole lot of help anyway. But certainly at the middle school levels and even some younger high school students, you may need to chase some notes, figure out fingerings. Obviously, this is the time to do that. And then introduce some introductory improvisational tools that the entire band can use. Those are the kinds of things that I like to get taken care of in the first unit. In the second unit, have to continue to refine instrumental skills. And I like to try to play longer melodic phrases, especially when you're sight reading sometimes. I mean, it's difficult to get more than 2 bars without the band crashing and burning. So obviously at this point, you want to be able to play longer melodic phrases. You want to make sure that you get through the entire piece. Even if it's just in chunks, you want to make sure that you play the entire thing. I'll just tell you a quick story about that. One of my first years teaching at the University of Minnesota, I was standing on stage at a concert conducting the jazz ensemble. And I had been very purposeful, or so I thought, in planning the rehearsals out. I had chunked up the chart, and we worked on solo stuff. We worked on backgrounds. We worked on introductions and endings and all this kind of thing. We got to this little transitional period in the middle of the piece, and I realized at the concert that we'd never actually played that before in rehearsal at all. So I said a short prayer, and we dove on in, and we got through it just fine. But that made an impression on me to make sure that I get through the entire piece relatively early in the process. We want to develop a stronger sense of ensemble phrasing. Perhaps all the longs and shorts aren't going to line up exactly at this point, but everyone should at least have an idea where they are. The note errors should be fewer and fewer. They shouldn't be missing. They should be missing fewer accidentals, making fewer shelf errors for the brass players, things like that. And then develop some improvisation skills in the large group. In the third unit, by now, there should be mastery of any instrumental technique issues. You shouldn't be needing to worry about fingerings or rhythms or anything like that. And also no more note or articulation errors. Now's the time when you really have to start polishing. Play all the way through the piece from start to top, from beginning to end, even at a slower tempo. I think a lot of times, I know I'm guilty of this. I don't know about the rest of you, but you tend to lose the forest through the trees sometime when you get real detailed in one particular section of the piece. So again, balancing long-term goals and short-term goals. Long-term goal, of course, is to get all the way through it. Make sure that you do that at some point at this point in the process. This is also when I really work on things like introductions, endings, transitional material, the transitional material that I forgot about earlier. I figured this is a good time to do that. But a lot of those detail kinds kinds of things, especially introductions and endings, because a lot of times the rhythm section is doing stuff other than just playing time. And so it requires a little bit more detail on their part. And then for the improvisation skills, I like to start developing improvisation skills in smaller groups or starting to develop soloists at this point. Everyone is still involved, certainly, but gradually whittling down the number of soloists that are going to play on a particular piece. As much as I want to have everyone have an opportunity to solo, having 20 soloists on one particular tune is probably not in your best interests. Break it up amongst a few different pieces if you have that many players that are interested in playing solos. And then in the final unit, of course, everything is ready at a solid time and tempo, being able to play the piece from start to finish. And I like to have the individual soloists identified and the solo order determined. A lot of the music I write has open solo space because I want to give you, the director, as much flexibility as possible in terms of who plays solos and that kind of a thing. And when there is an open solo section, there's a school of thought in the jazz community that says it should be treated kind of like a jam session, and you should just point to students and have them play. And as a jazz musician myself, I can see that I can see value in that. But in most school performance settings, I think, the students are going to feel more comfortable if they know when they're playing, if they know what the order is. It's going to make your job a lot easier because you'll have everything laid out ahead of time. And certainly the older I get, the more I try to plan stuff out. And even an extra musical benefit of doing that, I think, is teaching students that preparation is important, and knowing that they have to do something and prepare for it is an important thing to do. We're not just teaching music, of course, we're teaching life skills. And so hopefully at some point they'll have to, do a job interview or something along those lines. And a solo is a big deal. It's a big thing to do, and they should have the right to prepare for it. So I like to have all that worked out ahead of time, know when the backgrounds are going to be, and just be as organized as I possibly can before we take the stage. Because certainly, as we all know, if anything can go wrong, it probably will go wrong. And the more planning you do, the better you're going to insulate yourself for those kinds of things. So this is a spot where I want to step back just a little bit and just ask a couple of things. One, I think Giovanna put a poll up there. I'd be interested to know how much you plan prior to your jazz ensemble rehearsals. And we'll keep it simple. Is it lots? In other words, is it very specific? Do you have individual pieces named, bar numbers figured out, what you want to accomplish on those measures, timings, how long you're going to spend on a particular piece, that type of thing? Is it some? Do you just have the titles in mind? You want to get through this, and this in this particular time, but that's all you have kind of in your head? Or do you wing it and just kind of make it happen on the fly? And I'll freely admit I've done all three. The third one probably too much, but we're all struggling with time and things like that. But I would just be curious how much you plan prior to a rehearsal. And then just ask if there are any general questions that you have at this point. I'll be glad to address anything. And again, it's probably easiest if you just put it up in the chat window, and Giovanna can grab it and then send it my way. But I'll be glad to entertain any questions at this point.
So I have some. So we have some of the results of the poll.
Okay.
And they look great. We have that it's almost a tie between those who plan lots and plan some. We have 15 out of 40 that plan lots, 17 out of 40 that plan some, and 2 people that wing it.
Okay, so in other words, we have 2 honest ones, and then everyone else. No, I'm just kidding.
And then
no,
on your beginning question of the teaching level, we run the whole gamut. The majority of teachers in this webinar are middle school teachers. High school teachers come second.
Sure.
And then there's about 6 college professors, both at the junior and at the 4-year university level.
Okay, great.
We have 1 charter school teacher, and we have somebody who teaches homeschool students at both middle school and high school levels.
I try real hard to make a lot of these concepts as flexible as possible so that you can use them in whatever context you happen to be in. I use a lot of them with my college band. The music isn't quite as simple as what I'm going to be sharing with you, but the concepts are certainly similar.
We have a couple of questions here if you feel like you are ready to answer them.
Yep.
We have, what are some of the basic improvisation tools you introduce in Unit 1?
I like to teach everybody a specific scale that they can use. If you're familiar with the SOE Jazz Ensemble method, or even the Advanced Jazz Ensemble method, you know I'm a big chord and scale guy. I think it helps give students tools that they can use and tools that they understand. And so I'll either try to present them with a scale, and in some cases it may be a scale that they already know, or a scale that's real easy for them to learn. Or in some cases, certainly I did this in first jazz performance. I didn't even give them a scale. I just gave them 3 pitches that they could use to improvise with, because that's the biggest question that I get from students is if you ask them to play a solo, they say, well, what do I play? And so giving them a few notes that they can use and a few notes that they can mess around with, I found to be real helpful. So the basic improvisation skill would be the scale or the set of pitches that they can use to improvise with.
Let me ask a couple more questions and then we can probably continue on.
Sure.
When you say that you have group solos in Unit 3, do you have them solo on top of each other at the same time or take turns?
Oh, that's a great question. And the answer is yes. I do both. I do have them solo on top of each other. A great way to get everyone loosened up is to just have them all improvise collectively, either using a given scale or a given set of pitches or a given chord. I use this technique to warm up my university jazz ensembles. I'll say, everybody improvise collectively on an E-flat 7 chord or something along those lines. And the collective improvisation, soloing on top of one another, that's a great way to put it. The collective improvisation is so cool because students can feel free to experiment without the fear of being heard. Because let's face it, that's their biggest fear, and they can make mistakes without anybody hearing them. And then you can break that up, and you could have, say, just the trumpets improvise, then just the trombones improvise, then just the saxophones improvise, and then you can break it down into smaller groups.
Great. And one more, and then we'll move on. At what point, as director, do you make the executive decision that this piece isn't going to happen? We need to focus on everything else and ditch this chart.
That's a great question. Yeah, executive decision. I try to make those decisions as early as I can. One, because rehearsal time is valuable, and it's difficult to justify spending a whole lot of rehearsal time on something that isn't going to be performed. That's not to say that the performance is the be-all, end-all, but I try to make the decision as early as I can. Sometime in Unit 2 is when I try to do that. And it is an executive decision. It's not a democracy.
We have a few more, but I think we should probably let you continue on, and then we'll come back and answer some more questions.
Sure. Yeah. And also, if for whatever reason we don't get to all the questions, my contact information is going to be up at the end of this. You can feel free to email me. I'll be more than glad to be in touch with you after this is over with too. So moving on then. what I wanted to do was demonstrate some of these techniques, some of these benchmarks and things using a piece out of First Place for Jazz, and just kind of walk through how First Place for Jazz touches on these ideals. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at one of the tunes in the book. It's called Jumpin' Jellybeans. And First Place for Jazz is set up by key center. So the first 4 tunes are all in the key of B flat. The second tune is B flat Mixolydian. The third tune is B flat Dorian. And then the final tune in B flat is a B flat blues. So students learn the major Mixolydian, Dorian, and blues scales, which I like to call the big 3. Well, I guess there are 4 counting the blues scale. But if they know those 4 scales in 3 different keys, one, they're all very related, so they're very easy to adapt to once you know the related major scale, or the parallel major scale, I should say. Probably 85% of jazz harmony is built on those scales and the chords that go along with them. So it's a real good foundation to move on from there. So anyway, Jumpin' Jellybeans is in the key of B flat major, and we'll just listen to the first 20 seconds or so of it just to give ourselves a sense of what it sounds like. We're going to talk about rehearsal techniques, and just to review what kinds of objectives we're looking for in Unit 1, and also the techniques and assignments. So the objectives are up there: sight read, basic style and phrasing, etc. And then what are we going to do in the rhythm section and in the full ensemble and in solos and improvisation to get to those objectives and to accomplish them? And so we're going to start with the rhythm section. And in the rhythm section, of course, we need to encourage individual student practice, and we want to develop a good basic groove. And a good way to do that is to break it down, break the rhythm section down. Don't have them play all together. You know, the rhythm section is really unique as a section. They have to function as a section, but unlike, say, the trombones, where you have 4 trombones, or maybe 3, or maybe 2, or maybe 1 in some bands, but in all the other sections, they're at least homogeneous. They're all the same instrument. In the rhythm section, you've got all different instruments, and they're all doing different things at the same time also. So a lot of times breaking things down is really helpful. But we're going to start with individual student practice. And with the rhythm section, be interesting to know also how many rhythm section players are listening in today. I'm not a rhythm section player. As I said, I'm a trombone player, so I had to figure this stuff out kind of the hard way. And in instrumental methods classes, you'll take brass techniques and woodwind techniques and percussion techniques, but the percussion techniques likely doesn't have a whole lot of drum set included in it, and there's no such thing as guitar techniques or bass techniques. And so in First Place for Jazz, we created these spotlight exercises for each one of the rhythm section instruments, and they begin with fingering charts, as you see right there, and then also practice exercises that students can listen to and practice along with. And so this first one is this is all the chords in Jumpin' Jellybeans. Gives the guitar player a chance to play all of them. So we wanted to set those spotlight exercises up with just metronome accompaniment, because the idea is to encourage individual student practice. The rhythm sectionals now are where students get a sense of where their part fits in with the rest of the rhythm section. And I said a couple of minutes ago, the idea of breaking the rhythm section down is a good thing to do. In a rock groove like Jumpin' Jellybeans is, most everything centers around the bass and the bass drum, or the kick drum, as sometimes we call it in the business. So between the bass and the kick drum, if those two instruments aren't happening, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If those two instruments aren't happening, the rest of the rhythm section can be completely rocking out, and the foundation of the band just isn't going to be here. So so we start by just focusing on the bass and the kick drum. So in this first unit, that's what I'm going to want to focus on are those things. Now, obviously, in rehearsal, you know, the rhythm section is going to have to accompany the band as best that they can. But in terms of rehearsing the rhythm section and focusing time on the rhythm section, and again, as a trombone player, I gravitate towards the trombone section. I mean, it's the best section in the band. We all know this. But I think we all tend to focus on our own instruments whenever we're listening to any ensemble, and to make sure that we take the time for the rhythm section. So I wanted to just toss a couple of questions out to the internet here at large, everybody who is who's listening. Would you mind just tossing something into the chat window and just sharing what's your biggest challenge when you're dealing with your rhythm section for you? What's the hardest thing for you to have to deal with? Is it you know, lack of a bass player? Is it they rush or they drag, or you know, what is it? I'd be kind of interested to know where everybody's at in terms of their rhythm section, and maybe we can offer up a few ideas that might be helpful.
Lack of a bass player, nailed it.
Yeah.
Sounding like a unit and not like four individuals. Drummer drags.
Oh yeah.
For students to know each instrument's role and function.
Right.
Explaining a walking bass line and discussing piano comping patterns that aren't too busy.
Mm-hmm.
Coordinating guitar and piano players and keeping them from stepping on each other.
Yeah, that's a big one. Let's if you wouldn't mind, maybe tossing a few of those up onto the Google Doc. But let's start with the lack of a bass player, because that's a huge one. And let me just put this out here for all to hear and to see. If your band doesn't have a bass player, your band is not a band. A jazz band needs a bass player, or put it more correctly, needs someone to play the bass part. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be a bassist. Of course, ideally, it would be. Ideally, you would have an upright bassist to play all the swing tunes. You'd have an electric bassist who can play 6-string electric for the funk tunes, and then everything in between. I know that isn't reality. But someone has to cover the bass part, either using a keyboard bass or just a synthesizer with a bass patch. And it really is best to have a dedicated player doing that, as opposed to asking your pianist to cover the bass line with their left hand. If they're a really strong pianist, they may be able to do that, but they'll never generate the level of volume and just the level of consistency that's necessary in doing that. So, and playing bass parts on a keyboard is a lot easier than playing piano parts. And so recruiting somebody to do that really should be your top priority. Comping, how to deal with the comping between the guitar and piano. That's a big one too. I know a lot of rhythm sections that I hear, there's just so much stuff happening in the rhythm section all the time. You really can't hear much of anything that's going on. And a lot of times that results from the guitar player and the pianist, and sometimes even a vibes player perhaps, all comping at the same time. And And of course, the advantage of having them all comp at the same time is that everybody gets a chance to play. And that's a good thing. And they can learn from one another and they can support one another in that fashion. But if that's going to be the case, if they're all going to be playing at the same time, just make sure that they're especially between guitar and piano, that they're both listening real carefully for balance, and that you as director are listening real carefully for balance. Because if you tell an 8th grader to listen for balance, they'll probably nod their head, but they don't really know what they're supposed to listen for. It's probably going to be easiest for the guitar player to turn down a little bit. The other thing to do is, and especially for solo sections, this is a good thing to do, is have them alternate the comping. You know, if you've got, say, 3 soloists, piano can comp for solo number 1 and 3, and then guitar can comp for solo number 2. Or in the context of a full chart, piano can comp from, say, bar 9 to measure 27. Guitar can comp from measure 28 to the next, whatever the next chorus is, that type of thing. But a lot of times breaking it up is helpful. And early in the rehearsal process, in units 1 and 2, they all can play together, because you're trying to, like I said, develop that groove and develop those techniques. But certainly by the time performance rolls around, we want to kind of trim things out just a little bit. Okay. We talked about the rhythm section, now the full ensemble. And this is listen and sight read as much as possible. And to develop ensemble phrasing, I like to use a lot of singing. I'm sure a lot of you use singing in your rehearsals. And it's great because it saves the chops. It really internalizes what things feel like. And these rhythm figures that are in first place for jazz encourage listening and singing. And on these exercises, then what students will hear is they'll hear the rhythm sung, they'll hear the figures sung, they'll hear it played, then, or rather, they'll hear the rhythm sung, they should sing it, then they'll hear it played, and they should play it. So it's a lot of listening and imitation.
Da 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 da.
So the idea there is, again, listen and imitate. And the example that we heard was from the alto saxophone book. One of the advantages of First Place for Jazz is all the recordings are instrument specific. So the alto saxophone book listens to an alto player. Tuba book listens to a tuba player. So that's, I think, real helpful for young students. So solos and improvisation, basic techniques. As I said earlier, First Place for Jazz is broken up into presents 4 different scales in 3 different keys. And so we start with the major scale in the keys of B flat, F, and E flat concert. And so begin by just teaching the major scale, which is probably something that they already know, but starting to learn this scale in the context of how they would use it in a jazz ensemble rehearsal. And the numbers that were above there refer to scale degrees, and we use those to teach some of the other scales moving forward, like the Mixolydian scale in the next tune uses a flat 7 instead of a natural 7. So those are the kinds of things that I like to work on right at the very beginning. So as we come to the end here, we'll kind of fast forward through units 2, 3, and 4. It's kind of like one of those cooking shows where you do all the prep work and everything, and then magically everything is finished when you're done. But in the rhythm section for lesson 4, if you remember, we started building the groove back in lesson 1, and lesson 4 for the rhythm sectional is the complete groove. So now everything's been stacked up, and it sounds like this. Okay, and then moving on in improvisation, we learned a scale that they can use, how they can develop that then, are what we call these pitch sets. And this is the scale broken up into smaller sets of notes, and really encourages players to internalize the pitches of the scale. In learning scales for jazz performance, we don't we want to think about them differently than we think about them in concert band. And in concert band, we do scale practice for techniques and technique development and just to warm up and that type of thing. Jazz improvisation context, like I said, the idea is to internalize these notes so that players can draw upon them when they're improvising. And breaking them up into smaller pitch sets like this makes them, one, a little bit more accessible, but also helps internalize all these different pitches a little bit more, and it discourages just running up and down the scale like a lot of young players have a tendency to do. So as you can hear, it's the idea of call and response, listening and imitating. And as we move forward here in just a second, we'll see how we can apply those to a solo context. Also moving on to the improvisation area are these real short jazz theory lessons. Learning these scales is important, also learning the chords that go along with them. In the case of the major scale, it's the major 7 chord. The slide, the example right here is from the trumpet book, so that's why it says C major 7. For all the books that are transposed, all the instruments that are transposed, we include the concert key in parentheses so that those transposing instruments can get a sense of where they are and how that fits in with the rest of the ensemble. But you can see we've got the scale degrees there, so they can start to develop a relationship between what the degrees of the scale are and how those fit in with what the chord tones are, and give students a chance to write the chord tones as well as play them through. So we can just listen to that real quick. So the next exercise that relates to especially improvisation is what we call improvisation practice. And every tune has this improvisation practice exercise on it. This is the solo section of the song. And it gives the students a chance to apply what they've been doing in the practice exercises to playing an actual solo. And in the book, we have it marked out so that we encourage students to play each exercise as written and then go to improvisation practice and improvise something. Say with pitch set 1, improvise with just those 2 pitches and try playing a solo with just those 2 pitches. It's a chance for students to develop their improvisational skills on their own. And you can also use these recordings in a live rehearsal setting also. So we'll listen to just a little piece of this. It's only 16 bars and it's just rhythm section accompaniment. And that just goes on and repeats, and so students can use that to practice along with. At the bottom of what ends up being the second page of the exercises is this chart called Let's Check Progress. And the idea behind this is there's such a feeling out there for so many people that players that can improvise were like somehow struck by lightning when they were sleeping and they woke up one morning and they were able to do it. And of course, that's not true at all. Improvisation is a skill that can be learned, it can be practiced, and I want to encourage students to do that very thing. So keeping track of their practice in this chart here is a way for them to do that. It's also a way for you to assess their progress, hold them accountable for what they're doing, and to be able to share with your parents and with your administration and with anybody else who will listen, I guess, just what the students are working on. The whole idea here is to develop a curriculum for the jazz band, a curriculum that can be applied in a rehearsal setting where there isn't a whole lot of time to do stuff. You know, a lot of jazz bands I know meet before school or after school. And so I wanted to design this in such a way that it would be useful in all of those different contexts. And something like this really helps to hold students accountable. So everything that we've been talking about up until now has been related to big band rehearsals, jazz ensemble rehearsals. All the tunes in First Place for Jazz can also be used in small groups or in combos. And there are lead sheets in the back of the book of all the tunes, and the lead sheets are just like lead sheets that you'd find in a fake book. It's the melody and the chord changes, and that's it. There aren't any introductions, there's no endings, there's none of that kind of stuff. These are as real world versions of these tunes as we can put together. And the lead sheets can be used for small group performance, for combo performance, or also for individual practice. If students want to apply some of these concepts to a tune they can play, to a song that they can play, they can take advantage of these lead sheets in their lessons. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but it's tough for me to do practice exercises unless there's some kind of a cookie at the end of it. There's some kind of performance that I can do at the end of it. And having tunes available both in big band format, also in lead sheet format, helps make that happen. And so the lead sheets have rhythm section accompaniment. If you want to play the lead sheets in a small group live, all the rhythm section books have accompaniment exercises also or not accompaniment exercises, but rather accompaniment parts written for the rhythm section instruments. So you can play the lead sheets with a live rhythm section also. The interactive practice studio is the means by which these audio files are delivered. The books don't come with CDs or anything, but if there's a code in the back of the book that you can go to the Kjos website and download this software. The software is free, and then through here you can play either play the exercises using the interactive practice studio, or if you want to just download all the audio files to your computer and just play them off of there, you can do that too. Of course, everything is also available in SmartMusic, and so you can also access all of the recordings that way. So just as we wrap it up here, we'll have time to ask a couple of wrap-up questions, but before we get there, I just want to encourage everyone. You can stop by my website, deansorensenmusic.com. I mentioned that I had some pedagogy books available. Here they are right here, and I've got them on my website. And if you use there's a code SmartMusic, I'll give you a 20% discount on either one of these, or the debut CD from my Dean Sorensen Sextet. It's called Colors of the Soul. And if you want to get a hold of any of those at 20% off, I would encourage you to do that. I also have a website for First Place for Jazz called firstplaceforjazz.com. You can check out some more examples that I have online there and listen to a few more. You can listen to excerpts of all the big band charts, and there are a few more examples of some of the exercises on there too. And I know that Lee and Giovanna want to talk a little bit about SmartMusic, the Teach Full Access trial code. I'm going to let Lee or Giovanna maybe touch on that just a little bit.
Yeah, so like Dean said, all of the materials that he showed today and all the videos that you watched were created using the new SmartMusic, which is web-based, and so they're available in there. We have what's called a Teach Free platform, which allows you to see things, limited content for free. But because of this webinar, if you're interested in trying out the new SmartMusic, there's a form you fill out to have a platform created. And if in the comment section of that form you enter Jazz Tools, we'll give you a free access trial for, I think it's 30 days, so that you can explore not only Dean's materials, but the entire library available in the new SmartMusic. Additionally, if when you go in and try SmartMusic, you want to learn more about how to use it, we have free e-learning courses that are available on our website. So all you have to do is request access, and I will personally enroll you in them.
Excellent. And as promised, there's my contact information, soren048@umn.edu. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has after this, after we sign off on this. Well, maybe not immediately after, because I've got dinner plans coming up in just a little bit here. But certainly in the near future, I'll be more than glad to correspond with you and answer any questions that you have, and be as much of a resource as I can possibly be. The reason that we put these things together is that we want to help you as much as we can. We want to help you be effective teachers with your students and provide you with materials that will make your job a little bit easier. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be more than glad to talk to you.
And we want to thank Dean for sharing his time and information with us, and of course, any follow-up questions you have. Giovanna mentioned about that starting the Teach program, the Teach Free. And if you go to smartmusic.com, just click on that Educator Start Free button in the middle there, and that will take you to that form where you enter the code. And also at the top, a little hard to see here, but there is a link there for our training, which will take you to all those other options as well. So we look forward to that. I want to thank Dean and for helping us, and Giovanna for hosting here. And I think we'll stay on just a couple minutes for questions for Dean, but I wanted to make sure everybody knew that, just kind of like when the bell rings at school, that this would finish our presentation time. But I think we'll hang out for a couple minutes so we don't shortchange you on some of those answers. So thank you for attending. If you did want to hang on for a little bit of Q&A with Dean, we'll take another 5 minutes or so.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lee. And thanks to everybody for being here. If you're going to sign off, that's great. If you want to stick around, I'm more than glad to answer any questions anybody has. So are you going to throw those into the chat?
Yeah, I have them on the document so I can read some of the questions. Lee, someone is asking if you could please put Dean's email address up again so they can see it. There you go.
Boom. Oh, that was easy.
So,
I hope they're all this easy.
Here are some of the questions that were asked earlier on. Someone said, in the last few years, I have been struggling with getting a bass player for my middle school group. What ideas do you have?
Well, like I said, having someone play keyboard bass is really helpful. I don't imagine there's an orchestra program at the school, because that's a good way of perhaps poaching bass players. I know that Standard of Excellence and Tradition of Excellence both have electric bass books for full concert band use, and perhaps encouraging someone to play bass in a concert band would not only help round out what the low brass are trying to do and what the low instruments are doing, and provide a little bit more of a foundation, but that would help develop a player for the jazz ensemble as well. So developing someone that could play in both the concert band and the jazz ensemble, as opposed to just playing in the jazz ensemble.
Great. Here's another one. Do you give your students background into why the chords / scales work, or just say, here, use this?
Great question. I give them as much background as they want, I guess. With my college students, I can get a little bit thick sometimes, because especially those that are in my jazz theory class. I like to really put them on the spot. But if the students are interested and if they have the background for it, I'll give them as much information as they want. Talking about music theory, especially in an ensemble setting, you can get deep into the weeds pretty quickly if you're not careful. And so I like to think of the idea of just giving them enough information to be dangerous. But at the same time, if they're asking questions about why these things work, well, I want to answer those, and I'll answer those to as best I can at the level wherever they're at in terms of what I think they can understand in terms of music theory. Great question.
Okay. We have several more, so you let me know how many more you want to answer.
Okay, well, let's do 3 more, and then after that, then we'll and then maybe we'll call it. How's that sound?
Okay, sounds good.
Oh.
So here's another one. Do you teach big band and combo differently?
I do. The big band, there's much more of a focus, obviously, on ensemble performance, and in the combo, there's much more of a focus on improvised solos and small group interaction. Saying that makes it sound like having a big band listening to one another is less important, and that's not true. But in a small group setting, if you've only got 5 or 6 players, there's such a focus on interplay and on. It just seems like it's much more heightened for the students to listen to one another. Also, in a combo setting, I do a lot of work on having students create their own arrangements of things. I have them come up with their own harmony lines to melody lines, or even little counter melodies. They certainly have a role in deciding what the solo order is going to be. They have a role in deciding what style something is going to be. Sometimes you can take a standard tune like I don't know, All the Things You Are or something, and do it as a funk chart or something like that. I encourage those kinds of things. In a large ensemble, in a jazz ensemble, it's harder to do that kind of stuff just because of the number of people involved. So those are a couple of the differences in how I would approach those 2 ensembles.
Okay, here's the second to last question. Do you have any other improvisation games or activities that you use to help students develop strong solos?
I do like to have, I like to start every rehearsal with some kind of improvisational activity. Either it's a call and response type of activity, or I'll have them improvise on a chord or a scale that's going to relate to the first tune that we're going to do. One of the things that I like to do to get students to learn how to hear chord changes is to come up with a chord progression. Let's say a blues. Let's say a B flat blues. Okay, B flat 7 and E flat 7, the 1 chord and the 4 chord. Have them improvise with the guide tones, the 3rd and the 7th of the B flat 7 chord, the A flat and the D on the B flat 7 chord, and then move to the guide tones of the E flat 7 chord, the G and the D flat when that chord happens. So that way they can start to hear what happens when chords change, when notes go where they're supposed to go in the next chord. They start to learn ideas of voice leading, but giving them target tones like that is another good thing to do.
Okay, and then I think the last question, you kind of touched on it just now. When and how do you teach your students to solo while hitting the changes?
That's how I do it. I focus on chord tones, and there's a few different techniques that I use. I like to make sure that the students understand how all the chords of a particular tune are constructed. And we actually do this a lot in the Standard of Excellence Advanced Jazz Ensemble method. That's what makes it advanced, is students begin to learn to play chord changes. But they need to have an understanding of how each one of the chords in a chart is constructed individually, and then get a sense of how those chords line up together, and how you can create a line that goes in between these moving chords. And And guide tones are a great way to do that. The thirds and the sevenths of the chord. Those are the notes of the chord that give the chord its character. The third and the seventh, along with the bass note, is going to sound the quality of that particular chord. And if you move from chord to chord just using guide tones, you'll come up with a very smooth line. Most of the motion is going to be stepwise, and you're also going to be outlining the harmony really clearly. So I focus on having the students learn the chords that are necessary, and then focusing on the guide tones as they're moving through the progression.
All right.
Okay,
Well, those were the 3 questions. So thank you so very much.
Fantastic.
Yep. And thank you, Dean. I wish I would have had your materials when I was in 8th grade doing my first big jazz solo at the end of the night. My parents took me home and I asked how it went, and my dad said very nicely, "You really looked nice tonight." So
That's
hopefully the rest of you can avoid that wonderful compliment.
Yeah,
I'm over it though. It's been a
we've
while.
all been there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
You clearly are
Right.
over it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right on.
Well, okay, we are signing off. Thank you so much for attending,
Okay.
all of you, and hanging in there. And thank you, Dean. And you see his email. You better grab it quick, because then you can follow up on any other questions there.
Yeah.
So.
Sounds great. Thanks again for stopping by and checking this out, everybody. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, thank you very much.
Feel free to
Thank
get in
you, Dean,
touch.
for putting together such a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks for your help.